The House Oversight Committee hearing room was packed with representatives, staff members, journalists, and cameras positioned to capture every moment of testimony on government accountability and ethical standards in federal contracting. The atmosphere carried unusual tension because everyone present understood that this particular hearing had the potential to become contentious given the personalities involved and the politically charged nature of the investigation. Representative Matt Gaetz from Florida sat several seats down the row of Republican committee members, his posture suggesting barely contained eagerness to begin his questioning period. The 41-year-old congressman had built his national profile through aggressive confrontational questioning during hearings, viral social media moments, and willingness to make explosive accusations that generated significant attention regardless of their factual foundation. His loyal conservative base appreciated his combative approach and viewed him as a fighter willing to challenge what they perceived as the corrupt establishment, while his critics considered him a performative politician more interested in creating clips for right-wing media than conducting serious oversight. Across the room sat Representative Jasmine Crockett from Texas, a 43-year-old Democrat who served on this same committee and had established herself as an equally skilled questioner with a very different approach rooted in her 15 years practicing civil rights law before entering Congress. Crockett had gained national recognition for her ability to ask precise questions that exposed inconsistencies in witness testimony and for her skill at dismantling bad faith arguments through calm presentation of facts and logic. The two had clashed before during previous hearings, with their exchanges frequently going viral and generating extensive social media commentary from their respective supporters. Today's hearing was examining allegations of improper influence in the awarding of federal infrastructure contracts, a topic that touched on issues of corruption, accountability, and whether government officials were properly serving the public interest. What no one in that room could have predicted was that within the next hour, Matt Gaetz would attempt what he clearly believed would be a devastating trap question that would humiliate Jasmine Crockett and provide him with the kind of viral moment that would dominate conservative media for days, but that instead, Crockett's unexpected answer would be so perfect and so completely devastating to Gaetz that it would instantly become one of the most shared political moments of the year and would leave Gaetz looking foolish in front of millions of viewers. Before we examine the full details of this remarkable confrontation and analyze precisely why Crockett's response proved so effective, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel to ensure you continue receiving our comprehensive analysis of the political moments that shape contemporary discourse. We encourage you to share your location and perspective in the comments section regarding whether confrontational congressional hearings serve legitimate oversight functions or whether they have devolved into performance art designed primarily to generate viral content for partisan audiences. Now we shall proceed to examine exactly what transpired during this hearing and why this particular exchange between Gaetz and Crockett became a defining example of how preparation and quick thinking can turn an attempted attack into a self-inflicted wound. Matt Gaetz had arrived in Congress in 2017, representing Florida's 1st congressional district, a heavily Republican area in the Florida Panhandle. He quickly distinguished himself as one of the most vocal supporters of Donald Trump and as someone willing to use congressional hearings as platforms for advancing partisan narratives rather than conducting traditional oversight. His questioning style involved making inflammatory accusations, often based on cherry-picked information or misleading framing, forcing witnesses into defensive positions, and then using their responses as fodder for social media posts and appearances on conservative news programs. Gaetz understood intuitively how modern political communication worked in the social media age, recognizing that a single viral clip could reach more people and have more impact than any carefully researched committee report that journalists might ignore. His personal life had been marked by significant controversy, including a federal investigation into allegations of sex trafficking and relations with a minor, though he had not been charged and denied all wrongdoing. These allegations had damaged his reputation among moderates and independents, but had seemingly only strengthened his support among his core conservative base, who viewed the investigation as political persecution. Gaetz had continued operating as if the controversy did not exist, maintaining his aggressive confrontational approach and showing no inclination toward the kind of measured conduct that might help rebuild broader credibility. Jasmine Crockett represented Texas's 30th congressional district, which included parts of Dallas and surrounding suburbs. She had won election in 2022 after serving in the Texas state legislature, where she had built a reputation as an effective advocate for criminal justice reform and voting rights. Her background as a civil rights attorney meant she possessed extensive experience with evidence-based argumentation, cross-examination techniques, and the kind of rigorous preparation required to succeed in adversarial legal settings. These skills translated remarkably well to congressional hearings, where she had quickly become known for asking witnesses questions that were simultaneously respectful and devastatingly precise. Unlike representatives who used their questioning time primarily to deliver speeches with occasional rhetorical questions, Crockett actually listened to witness responses and conducted genuine interrogation that often revealed important information or exposed inconsistencies in testimony. Her viral moments typically involved calmly presenting facts that undermined Republican narratives or delivering pointed observations about hypocrisy and double standards in how different groups were treated by the political system. She had become a particular target for conservative media figures who viewed her as representing the progressive wing of the Democratic Party and who regularly attacked her positions on criminal justice, healthcare, and economic policy. The tension between Gaetz and Crockett had been building through several previous committee hearings where they had clashed over procedure, witness treatment, and the underlying purposes of various investigations. Gaetz viewed Crockett as an obstacle to his ability to conduct the kind of theatrical questioning that generated attention, while Crockett viewed Gaetz as someone who debased the oversight process by prioritizing performance over substance. Their exchanges had been pointed but had not yet produced the kind of definitive moment where one clearly dominated the other. Both understood that congressional hearings in the modern era functioned partially as stages for these kinds of confrontations, and both were skilled at using the format to their advantage. The question was which approach would prove more effective when they inevitably clashed again. The hearing itself had proceeded through several hours of testimony from witnesses involved in the federal contracting process. The investigation centered on allegations that certain contractors with political connections had received favorable treatment in the bidding process for major infrastructure projects funded by recently passed legislation. Democratic members were using the hearing to argue for stronger ethics requirements and transparency measures to prevent corruption and ensure taxpayer money was spent appropriately. Republican members were attempting to use the same evidence to argue that the Biden administration had created a system ripe for abuse and that the infrastructure legislation itself had been a corrupt giveaway to Democratic donors, disguised as investment in American infrastructure. The witnesses included federal contracting officials, representatives from companies that had received contracts, and ethics experts who could speak to whether proper procedures had been followed. Matt Gaetz had been waiting through several hours of testimony for his turn to question witnesses, and observers could see him becoming increasingly animated as he prepared for what he clearly anticipated would be a significant moment. He had been typing notes on his laptop, conferring with staff members, and occasionally smirking as if he possessed information that would shock the room. When the committee chairman finally recognized Gaetz for his 5 minutes of questioning, he immediately made clear that he was not actually interested in questioning the witnesses present. Instead, he announced that he wanted to address his colleague, Representative Crockett, directly regarding statements she had made in previous hearings and in media appearances about ethics and accountability. This was an unusual procedural move, as questioning time was typically reserved for examining witnesses rather than engaging in exchanges with other committee members. The chairman attempted to redirect Gaetz toward the witnesses, but Gaetz insisted under House rules that he could use his time as he saw fit and that his questions to Crockett were relevant to the committee's work. The chairman reluctantly allowed him to proceed, knowing that attempting to prevent the exchange would only create additional controversy. Gaetz turned in his chair to face Crockett directly, his expression suggesting supreme confidence in what he was about to do. He began by noting that Crockett had been very vocal in this hearing and in previous proceedings about the importance of ethics, transparency, and accountability in government. He emphasized these words with particular intensity, clearly building towards something he considered a devastating revelation. Crockett maintained a neutral expression, appearing neither concerned nor particularly interested in where Gaetz might be heading. She had experienced enough confrontational hearings to recognize the setup for an attempted gotcha moment, and her legal training had taught her never to show reaction before understanding the full question. Gaetz continued building his case, noting that Crockett had criticized Republicans for various alleged ethical lapses and had positioned herself as a champion of clean government and proper conduct. The repetition was clearly designed to establish a standard that Gaetz believed he could then show Crockett had violated, creating the kind of hypocrisy exposure that generated viral moments and damaged credibility. Then Gaetz delivered what he clearly believed was his trap. He stated that he had reviewed Crockett's financial disclosure forms and had discovered that she had failed to properly report certain stock transactions within the required time frame, a violation of the Stock Act that governed congressional financial reporting. He held up papers that he claimed were documentation of these violations, waving them for emphasis. He declared that Crockett had been lecturing Republicans about ethics, while she herself was violating federal law regarding financial transparency. He demanded that she explain why she believed she should be allowed to investigate others for ethical lapses when she could not even follow basic disclosure requirements herself. The framing was classic Gaetz, taking a piece of information and presenting it in the most damaging light possible, to create a narrative of hypocrisy that would resonate with conservative audiences predisposed to believe that progressive politicians were corrupt, despite their rhetoric about accountability. Several Republican committee members nodded along, clearly pleased with what they anticipated would be a difficult moment for Crockett. The room fell silent as everyone waited for Crockett's response. Many representatives, when confronted with this kind of attack in a public hearing, would become defensive, would attempt to explain or justify the situation, or would deflect by attacking the questioner's own record. Any of these responses would have allowed Gaetz to maintain control of the narrative and to continue pressing his attack. Journalists present readied themselves to report on the confrontation, recognizing that this exchange would likely become a significant story regardless of how Crockett responded. Conservative media outlets monitoring the hearing prepared to amplify Gaetz's accusation, while progressive outlets braced to defend Crockett or provide context that might mitigate the damage. The conventional political wisdom suggested that Gaetz had landed a significant blow, and that Crockett would struggle to recover from the accusation, regardless of the underlying facts. But Jasmine Crockett did not respond in any of the expected ways. Instead, she smiled slightly, an expression that suggested she knew something that Gaetz did not. She thanked him for raising the issue and confirmed that yes, she had indeed filed a late disclosure report for certain stock transactions. Then she delivered the response that would instantly destroy Gaetz's attack and turn his attempted humiliation into his own embarrassment. She explained calmly that the stocks in question were held in a blind trust that she had established specifically to avoid any conflicts of interest or even the appearance of using her position for financial gain. She noted that the late filing had occurred because the trust administrator had not provided her office with the transaction information within the time frame that would have allowed timely filing, and that when her staff discovered the reporting delay, they had immediately filed the required disclosure and paid the small administrative fine associated with late filing. She emphasized that this was exactly how the system was supposed to work, with prompt correction of administrative errors and acceptance of the minor penalty designed to encourage timely compliance. Then, she delivered the line that would be replayed millions of times across social media and would instantly end Gaetz's attack. Crockett said, "So yes, Congressman Gaetz, I did file a late disclosure report for stocks in a blind trust designed to prevent conflicts of interest, and I paid the fine. Now, would you like to discuss your financial disclosure reports? Or perhaps we could talk about the federal investigation into your alleged sex trafficking of a minor. Because if we are using congressional hearing time to air personal allegations rather than conducting actual oversight, I am happy to have that conversation, though I suspect you might find it considerably less comfortable than the conversation you attempted to start." The room erupted immediately. Democratic members barely suppressed laughter at the devastating counterattack. Republican members looked stunned, several exchanging uncomfortable glances. Journalists in the press gallery began typing furiously, recognizing that Crockett had just delivered one of the most memorable comeback lines in recent congressional history. The cameras captured Matt Gaetz's face as the blood drained from it, his expression shifting from confident aggression to shocked recognition that he had made a serious miscalculation. He had attempted to trap Crockett with an accusation that turned out to have an entirely innocent explanation, while simultaneously opening himself up to mention of far more serious allegations that had dominated news coverage of his own conduct. The tactical disaster was complete and immediate. Gaetz attempted to recover, stammering that his question had been about Crockett's disclosure practices and that her response was inappropriate and deflecting from his legitimate inquiry. But his protest sounded weak and defensive, particularly given that he had been the one to shift the hearing away from witness testimony to pursue personal attacks on a colleague. Crockett simply responded that she had answered his question completely and honestly, and that if he wanted to continue discussing personal conduct and ethical standards, she was prepared to have that conversation in its entirety, rather than allowing him to selectively raise issues about others while remaining silent about his own controversies. She suggested that perhaps the committee should return to its actual business of questioning witnesses, unless Gaetz wanted to invite a broader discussion of ethics that would necessarily include his own situation. The chairman, sensing that the exchange had gone badly for Gaetz and eager to prevent further deterioration, quickly announced that Gaetz's time had expired and recognized the next member for questioning. The immediate aftermath of the exchange saw Gaetz sitting silently for the remainder of the hearing, occasionally conferring with staff, but no longer displaying the aggressive confidence he had projected earlier. Other Republican members who had nodded along when Gaetz launched his attack now seemed reluctant to engage with Crockett, recognizing that she had demonstrated an ability to counterattack effectively, and that she was not intimidated by confrontational questioning. Democratic members appeared energized by Crockett's response, with several giving her subtle acknowledgments of appreciation for how she had handled the situation. The hearing continued with testimony from remaining witnesses, but the confrontation between Gaetz and Crockett had become the story that everyone present knew would dominate coverage of the proceedings. Within minutes of the exchange occurring, clips began circulating on social media platforms with extraordinary velocity. The video of Crockett's response was posted by multiple accounts simultaneously, including congressional staff, journalists who had been monitoring the hearing, and political activists who immediately recognized the viral potential of the moment. Twitter saw the creation of multiple hashtags related to the exchange, with Crockett ends Gaetz and Gaetz own trending nationally within the first hour. The clip accumulated millions of views with remarkable speed as users across the political spectrum shared it with commentary ranging from celebratory to analytical to grudgingly respectful. Progressive activists treated the moment as validation of their support for Crockett, sharing the clip with commentary about how she represented the kind of fearless leadership they wanted from Democratic politicians. Political moderates, who might not have agreed with all of Crockett's policy positions, nonetheless appreciated the skill with which she had turned Gaetz's attack against him, recognizing it as an effective example of political judo, where an opponent's aggression becomes their downfall. The response from conservative audiences and media was more complicated and revealed internal tensions within right-wing political discourse. Some conservative commentators acknowledged that Gaetz had walked into a trap of his own making by attempting to attack Crockett without adequately preparing for possible responses. They noted that his decision to raise financial disclosure issues when he remained under cloud of far more serious allegations represented poor strategic judgment that had predictably backfired. These critics suggested that Gaetz's approach had damaged Republican credibility on oversight issues by making their ethical attacks appear hypocritical and politically motivated rather than substantive. However, other conservative voices rallied to defend Gaetz, arguing that Crockett's response had been inappropriate deflection and that mentioning the investigation into Gaetz's conduct was a low blow designed to distract from legitimate questions about her disclosure practices. These defenders claimed that the mainstream media and social media platforms were deliberately amplifying the clip to damage Republicans while ignoring the underlying issue of Crockett's late filing. This defense struggled to gain traction, given that the video clearly showed Gaetz had initiated the personal attack and that Crockett had actually answered his question directly before turning the tables on him. The mainstream political media coverage of the exchange was extensive and generally portrayed Crockett as having dominated the confrontation. Major newspapers published articles analyzing the exchange, with headlines focused on how Crockett had turned Gaetz's attack against him. Cable news networks ran segments featuring the clip, along with commentary from political strategists discussing the tactical mistakes Gaetz had made and the skill Crockett had demonstrated in her response. Several journalists noted that the exchange exemplified the challenges Republicans faced when attempting to pursue ethics attacks against Democrats, while dealing with significant ethical controversies within their own caucus. Media critics observed that the viral circulation of the clip demonstrated how individual moments from congressional hearings could reach far larger audiences than the hearings themselves, influencing public perception of the participants in ways that transcended the substantive issues the committees were meant to investigate. The impact on both participants' public profiles was significant, though in opposite directions. For Jasmine Crockett, the exchange reinforced and expanded her reputation as someone who could handle confrontational situations with exceptional skill. Her congressional office reported an enormous increase in constituent communications, with messages coming from across the country expressing support and appreciation for how she had responded to Gaetz. Her social media following grew substantially as people who had not previously known much about her became interested based solely on this viral moment. Fundraising for her political operation received a significant boost from small-dollar donors inspired by her performance. Progressive political organizations immediately incorporated the clip into their messaging as an example of the kind of strong, effective leadership they were working to elect across the country. The exchange became part of her political brand and was referenced regularly in subsequent media appearances and campaign communications as evidence of her strength under pressure. For Matt Gaetz, the aftermath proved considerably more uncomfortable. The clip of him being outmaneuvered by Crockett circulated widely enough that even people with minimal interest in politics encountered it, creating awareness of his failed attack that extended well beyond his usual audiences. Conservative media outlets that typically supported him faced the awkward task of either acknowledging that the exchange had gone badly or attempting to spin it in ways that contradicted what viewers could see for themselves in the widely available video. Several Republican colleagues reportedly expressed frustration to him privately about the incident, viewing it as an unforced error that had handed Democrats a significant messaging victory and had reminded swing voters about the investigations into his conduct at a time when Republicans were trying to focus attention on Democratic vulnerabilities. His social media posts attempting to reframe the exchange or minimize its significance received far less engagement than the original clip showing Crockett's response, suggesting that his ability to control narrative had been significantly undermined by the confrontation. The exchange had implications that extended beyond the immediate participants to influence broader political discourse and strategy. Democratic politicians and communications staff studied Crockett's response as a model for how to handle aggressive confrontational attacks from Republicans. The key lessons identified included the importance of having thorough knowledge of one's own record to enable quick explanation of any alleged issues, the value of remaining calm rather than becoming defensive when attacked, and the effectiveness of counterattacking by highlighting the questioner's vulnerabilities rather than simply defending against accusations. Republican strategists conversely analyzed the exchange as a cautionary example of the risks associated with launching personal attacks without adequate preparation for all possible responses. The incident reinforced existing internal debates within Republican circles about whether the confrontational aggressive approach, exemplified by Gaetz, was actually effective, or whether it created more problems than it solved. Congressional oversight hearings in general came under renewed scrutiny following this exchange, with commentary focusing on whether these proceedings were still serving their intended purpose of conducting government accountability, or whether they had devolved primarily into opportunities for viral confrontations. Critics argued that both parties were increasingly using hearing time not to gather information from witnesses, but to create clips that could be shared on social media to energize partisan bases. They suggested that the Gaetz-Crockett exchange, while entertaining, exemplified the dysfunction that had overtaken congressional oversight. Defenders of the current system argued that in an era when most Americans paid minimal attention to government proceedings, viral moments from hearings at least created some public awareness and engagement, even if the format was imperfect. This debate about the proper function and conduct of congressional hearings continued long after the specific confrontation between Gaetz and Crockett had faded from immediate headlines. The legal and ethical issues underlying the exchange also received more detailed examination in subsequent reporting. Journalists investigated Crockett's financial disclosure situation thoroughly and confirmed that her explanation had been entirely accurate. She had indeed established a blind trust to avoid conflicts of interest. The late filing had occurred due to administrator delays rather than any attempt to conceal information, and she had promptly corrected the filing and paid the required fine when the issue was discovered. Ethics experts interviewed about the situation confirmed that this represented exactly how the oversight system was supposed to function, with minor technical violations being addressed through transparent correction and nominal penalties. This reporting validated Crockett's response and further undermined any attempt by Gaetz to claim he had exposed genuine ethical problems. Simultaneously, reporting on Gaetz's situation reminded readers that the investigation into his conduct had involved far more serious allegations, including potential federal crimes, creating a stark contrast between a minor administrative late filing and potential sex trafficking charges. The incident became a teaching moment in political science and communications courses at universities across the country. Professors used the video to illustrate concepts including strategic communication, crisis management, the importance of preparation, and how to effectively counterattack when on the defensive. Students analyzed what made Crockett's response so effective, identifying elements, including her direct answer to the original question, her calm delivery that contrasted with Gaetz's aggression, her accurate highlighting of the comparative severity of different ethical issues, and her willingness to escalate rather than retreat when attacked. The exchange served as a real-world example of theoretical principles about rhetoric, persuasion, and political communication operating in a high-stakes environment. For political activists and campaign staff working on congressional and other competitive races, the Gaetz-Crockett exchange reinforced evolving best practices about candidate preparation and opposition research. The incident demonstrated that candidates needed to have comprehensive understanding of their own records, including any potential vulnerabilities, so they could quickly explain and contextualize issues if opponents attempted to weaponize them. It showed the value of thorough research on opponents to enable effective counterattacks when necessary. It illustrated that defensive postures in confrontational exchanges often proved less effective then confidently addressing accusations, and then shifting focus to the attacker's vulnerabilities. These lessons influenced candidate training programs and debate preparation strategies across multiple election cycles following the viral exchange. The longer-term impact on both careers remained subject to ongoing evaluation. Jasmine Crockett's stock within Democratic politics clearly rose following the exchange, with increased speculation about her potential for higher office and expanded leadership roles within the congressional caucus. Matt Gaetz continued operating much as he had before the incident, maintaining his confrontational approach despite the setback, though some observers noted he appeared somewhat more careful about picking his targets and had fewer viral confrontational moments following his failed attack on Crockett. The exchange became a permanent part of both politicians' Wikipedia entries and media profiles, referenced regularly when journalists wrote about either representative. The fundamental lesson from the confrontation between Matt Gaetz and Jasmine Crockett involves the recognition that aggressive attacks in political settings carry significant risks when the target is well prepared and capable of effective counterattack. Gaetz had assumed that raising the disclosure issue would put Crockett on the defensive and create a narrative of hypocrisy that would damage her credibility on ethics issues. He had not adequately prepared for the possibility that she would have an innocent explanation for the late filing and would be willing to immediately counterattack by raising the far more serious controversies surrounding his own conduct. His miscalculation turned what he intended as a damaging attack into his own humiliation, demonstrating that confrontational tactics require thorough preparation and strategic judgment about when and how to deploy them. Crockett's response, meanwhile, demonstrated that effective political communication often involves not just defending against attacks, but seizing opportunities to go on offense when opponents create openings through their own aggression. The exchange ultimately represents a microcosm of broader tensions and dynamics in contemporary American politics. It illustrated how congressional oversight hearings had become venues for partisan confrontation as much as substantive investigation. It demonstrated the power of social media to amplify individual moments from government proceedings and transform them into defining narratives that shaped public perception. It showed how personal conduct and ethics allegations had become routine weapons in political combat, deployed strategically to undermine opponents regardless of the comparative severity of different violations. It revealed the growing importance of communication skills and ability to handle confrontational exchanges in determining political success or failure. These themes extend far beyond the specific incident to characterize much of how political discourse and competition function in the modern era. We appreciate your attention throughout this comprehensive examination of a significant moment in contemporary congressional oversight proceedings. Please consider subscribing to our channel to ensure continued access to detailed analysis of political developments and communication strategies that influence public discourse. Your engagement through comments contributes to broader dialogue about effective political communication and congressional accountability. We encourage you to share this analysis with networks who would benefit from understanding how preparation and strategic thinking can transform potentially damaging attacks into decisive victories, and why such examples matter for evaluating political effectiveness in the current media environment.